Let's get started. Welcome. My name is Katie Brennick. I am the Training and Development Specialist here at School on Wheels. I facilitate most of these webinars, so some of you may know my face by now. I want to thank you all for joining us today to hear from Natalie Platon. She is an elementary school teacher with lots of experience, and she is also a very established part of the School on Wheels family. So I'm really excited to hear what she has to say today. She'll be talking to us about helping students build consistency in order to gain success, especially right now when it is just so hard and chaotic for some of our students. So Natalie, I'd like to pass it off to you now.
Thanks so much, Katie. All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right, so for our webinar today, we're going to be talking about helping students to build consistency and obtain academic success in uncertain times. And just like what Katie said, I know that a lot of students have been going through hardship. Even my students just living in East LA, a lot of them are low income, and this situation has put them in a more intense situation. And I know that's the same for a lot of the homeless students that all of you are tutoring. So what we're going to talk about today are just a few things. First, it's just things to keep in mind before we even go to like building relationships or goal setting. And then afterwards, the biggest priority is just building relationships with our students. Because I think before we can even set a goal, before we can even expect them to achieve anything, we need to know them as people. And especially during this time where things are so tough, it's just really important to get to know your student well. And then after we build that relationship, we could finally go to building consistency. Trying to build that schedule and get them used to that, so that even if their life may be hectic, they can at least expect consistency from their tutoring session. And then finally, after the relationship is built and after we have some consistency, then we can finally get to goal setting. And then if you have any questions, we'll answer that at the end. So here's some info about me. My name is Natalie Platon. I'm currently an elementary school teacher at Kipalumnar Academy, and I've been teaching there for 5 years. And I'm actually really proud of my school. USC named it the top public school in LA for Latino students in both English and math. So I've learned a lot of strategies to help reach out to students. And I was also a summer vista at School on Wheels. I interned there for a few months. And I was also a tutor with School on Wheels for 5 years too. So I understand the difficulty of working with homeless students because their situation is so inconsistent. I also worked in an after-school program called Think Together. I also worked with teenage mothers at a shelter called St. Anne's. And then finally, I was a core member at City Year Los Angeles, where I also continued to work in East LA. And East LA has been the one area that I've been passionate to work in. I speak Spanish, so the Latino and Latina community is really important to me. All right, first thing, things to keep in mind. Just in all the years I've been teaching, I've never experienced a situation like COVID-19, and a lot of teachers could say the same thing. And something our principal told us was that we just have to be flexible and understanding, because I think we knew like the kind of situation our students were in when everyone was at work, when everyone was going to school, but now that everyone is at home, that situation has totally changed. And also something else to remember is that the families we serve and the students we serve, their situation is constantly changing. Like, yeah, mom might have a job today, doesn't mean she's gonna have a job tomorrow. Or maybe they were living their home today, but now they already have to move. So because their situation is constantly changing, that means our goals and our expectations have to be constantly evolving as well. Things to keep in mind is that our students may be experiencing a lot of hardship right now. They could be going through trauma. They could be experiencing hunger, especially because school is usually the #1 way that students get meals. They could be experiencing a lot of fear, having to stay at home, not knowing much about the disease. And then also they could be experiencing a lot of loneliness. This is something I actually saw a lot with my kids. Like, I try to have a meeting with them twice a week on Google Classroom, so just so that my students can see each other. But I've known kids that have accidentally forgotten that our meeting was like at 11:30, and then their parents are texting me that they're crying because they missed the meeting and they couldn't see their friends. So the loneliness is pretty hard for them too. And then finally, no parent supervision. I know with a lot of my Latino families, the parents have to work. So with my students, the older brother's taking care of them or the older sister, and usually they're only in middle school or high school, they're lucky. So these are just like a lot of obstacles students are facing that could be a factor when you have your session with them. So if our students are going through all these situations and all this hardship, how do we support them? First things first, we have to build relationships. And even if we've known our student for a while already, like a few months, it's probably important to start all over again because of this situation, because now you don't know how things have changed for the family. So what I do first whenever I meet with a student is I always have a check-in. I always ask like, oh, how are you doing? How's your family? And just give them time to talk, because maybe they haven't even had a chance to talk to anyone about their situation. I also try to discreetly ask like, hey, have you had breakfast yet? Or have you had lunch? And this helps me keep in mind like if they've eaten, because that could be a factor too if they're hungry. After the check-in and after I know that they're doing well, then I always try to quickly ask my student about their interests or hobby. Like if I know my student plays video games, I'd be like, oh, how's your Super Smash Brothers game? Did you play with anyone? And then we just talk about that for a few minutes too. And then I quickly share one of my interests or hobbies. So like, for example, I love drawing. So I'll tell them, oh, I drew this yesterday. That way we could know each other a little bit better. And then after that, if everything has been fine, then we do our tutoring session. And then after the tutoring session, I try to do an activity at the end. So like I said before, I really like drawing. I try to just do a quick drawing activity with them on the computer. And then that's just something we could do together, and it could help them build that positive memory and that positive relationship with me. Although I know for some of you, like being a tutor, you might only have like an hour with them. So just keep your schedule in mind, because if you're already spending like 5 minutes to talk to them in the beginning, and then you do like a 10-minute activity in the end, then just make sure you're paying attention to the clock so you still have time to tutor. And then 2 other things to keep in mind: just empathize with their situation, because maybe they seem frustrated, maybe they seem angry. It's nothing personal. Just be like, oh, I understand, like, it's scary. Like, I tell my kids, I understand it's tough being at home. And then when they see me being empathetic, that makes them more willing to share with me too. And then lastly is just being authentic. Like, I think for me, I've shared my own hardships with them so that they know that the struggle they're feeling, it's happening to all of us, and that I'm not like a perfect person being their tutor. And I think that helps build our connections more. All right, so that's it for building relationships. So what I'd like to do right now is we're going to practice. We're going to have a scenario, because part of teaching is having you all practice too. So after I read the scenario, I would like for people to just type a response and just tell the entire group, what would you do if you're experiencing this scenario? So let's look at it. It's your first session ever with your student. Her mom says that her name is Michelle and that she's in 3rd grade, but she's extremely shy. When you talk to her about yourself, she smiles and nods. However, she does not share anything about herself. You start to ask her about her hobbies and interests, but she keeps shrugging and saying, I don't know. Mom says she's always like that. She has trouble talking with people. Michelle starts looking nervous. So I know some of you, it's not the first time you've been with your student, but what would you do if you were Michelle's tutor? So let's see what people are saying in chat. Oh, and I'll copy and paste the scenario so you could all see it again. Oh, nice. Someone says singing a song with them. Icebreaker, definitely. Like even doing a fun game, that's a great idea. Yeah, like someone said ask something of visible interest, that's a good one. Like usually if kids are wearing free dress, like if you notice them wearing a certain shirt, that might be something you can ask them about. Yeah, definitely sharing some of their likes, that's really good. Yeah, singing Baby Shark, everyone knows that song for sure. Oh, I like what one tutor said, providing options, because sometimes they don't know how to express themselves, but if you give them choices, then it's easier for them to share. Yes, definitely sharing some of your interests and just making that connection. Yeah, asking questions too. Oh, someone said they had a similar experience and then they just shared about their dog and they were immediately engaged. Like the great thing is that once you build that first connection, the other connections just come a lot more quickly. Yeah. Oh yeah, like if you do a survey and both of you could do a survey where you talk about like favorite color, favorite ice cream, favorite movie, and you could see if you have anything in common. That's a great suggestion too. Awesome. Oh, asked to talk about a sibling or grandparent, and that's great too, because then you get a little bit insight into the family history without like explicitly asking for it. All right, great job, everyone. Awesome answers. Let's go back to the next strategy. All right, so once you've built that relationship, then you could build consistency. This is something I experienced too, because when we started working from home, I had to teach my students online on Google Meet and Google Hangout. And it was tough at first because I would tell parents like, hey, this innovator or the student has to be here on this day at this time. And even though I would tell them the day before, they would still be late. So I found myself having to remind the parent like 5 minutes before the session started, like, hey, we're about to have our tutoring session soon, see you there. And by immediately texting them in the moment, that let me know like, oh, the student can make it or not. And then if the parent wasn't responding to my texts, then I knew something might be up. And here's some troubleshooting strategies, because I know sometimes texting doesn't work. So here are several things you could do.
Natalie?
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't think we can see your screen. Would you mind resharing?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. Can you see it now? Oh. Katie, are you able to see my screen?
Yes, I am. Perfect.
Okay, awesome. So yeah, just going back to what I said before, make sure that your session time and days are clear, and then always be on time and always be present. And then if you're having trouble with your student coming to session on time, here's some strategies you could do. So first, have the parent's contact number in case they're late to session. That way, if they're already late, like by 5 minutes or so, and you texted them, they're still not responding, then you'll probably have to call them. And then if students have been inconsistent with sessions, try to find the root of the problem. Because I had certain students where I would be meeting them week after week, and they're just late every single time. And even though I was texting them, they would still be late. So eventually I had to talk to my student directly about it and be like, oh, hey, I noticed that you've been late the past few sessions. Is everything all right? And by asking, is everything all right? Then he was able to answer like, oh, my mom actually works during the daytime, so my brother's been the one helping me go on the computer, which made me realize that I shouldn't have mom's number, but I should actually have the brother's number. And then by calling the brother, then the brother was able to make sure that the student was going session on time. But then the root of the problem could be different things. Like usually it's parents working, or maybe students don't have a schedule. Because like I had some students too where they were waking up like different times every single day. Like one day would be 9 a.m., the other day would be 12 p.m., another day would be 11 a.m. And then when I found that out, I had to create a schedule with that student and with the parent so that I can encourage them to wake up at the same time. That way they were more likely to come to session on time. And then also by asking, is everything all right? Something else I also ask is, how can I help you? Like, is there, like, if I can help you, let me know how. And then that'll help them be more on time too. And something else I do, if you have the capability of doing this, is I'll also check in on students on a day I don't meet. I'll text them. Like, for example, if I'm meeting a student on Monday and I only meet with him every Monday, I'll probably text him on Thursday, just a quick text, like text mom, like, hey, how are you guys doing? Just to make sure they're doing all right for the rest of the week. So those are strategies for building consistency. And now what we're going to do is we're going to do another scenario. So here it is. You have been meeting with Isaiah for the past month once a week. Every time you've met, he's always been late and comes in at random times. Sometimes he's late a few minutes, but the last session he was late by 10 minutes. Today is your 4th session and you've been waiting for 5 minutes so far, but he hasn't joined the video chat. What do you do? All right, so I'm gonna copy and paste this in the chat, but feel free to start typing. How would you address this situation? And I know our individual situations could be different. Yeah, definitely contacting parents. And something I do too is like, if I already notice they're late by like 2 minutes, I don't wait for like 5 minutes to pass or 10 minutes to pass. I usually just contact them immediately. Has anyone else had to use a different strategy besides texting and contacting? Sometimes I've had to give students incentives for coming session on time because the tardiness was so bad. So I'd be like, hey, we'll have a special hangout on another day if you're on time this week. That's a good idea too. Like, when you create the session with your student and parent, make sure you get their input, because I've made the mistake of just choosing a time for a parent. Like, for example, before I had a family where I was like, oh, let's make our session 10 a.m. Does that work for you? And then they said, yeah, 10 a.m. is great. But then every time it was 10 a.m., they were never there. And then after 2 weeks, I was like, oh, I noticed you haven't been coming at 10 a.m. Is everything okay? And then they said, oh, yeah, he's still not awake. I was like, okay, let's change the session then. And then afterwards, they kept coming on time. Yeah, definitely be like a detective, get that information, asking about their wake up times, their regular schedules, because it's easy to assume that, oh, every kid will wake up at the same time like school, but when they're at home, it's definitely different. Yeah. All right, awesome. I think we're ready for the last strategy. So let me remember to share my screen because I forgot last time. All right, cool. So now that we've built relationships and now that we've built consistency, the final step is we can finally set a goal. We can finally set an academic goal with our students, which I think is the most exciting part. So before we could set a goal, though, we have to keep in mind, what is your student's current situation? And then also, make sure they know and they understand what the goal is too. Because, for example, my students use like Khan Academy and other computer programs. So I'd say like, oh, your goal's to achieve a certain number of lessons. But then that wasn't really clear for them. So I had to show them through Google Meet exactly what I meant by a lesson, because they thought like a lesson was only like one problem. But I was like, no, a lesson's like you have to do the whole thing, not just one part. And then once they understand the goal, then make sure they have somewhere like a notebook maybe to keep track of their goals. That way they could always keep it in mind. And then lastly, set high expectations, but keep it attainable. Like for example, my students had this other math program they had to do, and then the goal was for them to reach 80% by the end of the year. But I purposely set their goals 100%, so that by trying to reach 100, they would actually achieve 80, which was the original goal. And then also celebrate small wins. Like I had some of my students where even though the goal was 80%, some of them fell short and only reached like 60% or maybe 65%, but they had initially been at 15%. So I wasn't really focused on the end goal, but more like how much they grew. And then troubleshooting, goals should probably be revisited weekly, because I noticed with some of my students, like the initial goal I set, it was a little bit too high of a bar for them, so I slightly lowered it. That way it was more within their reach. And then when they finally achieved that goal, then I could set the goal higher again. And then if goals are not being met, then an adjustment might be needed. And I know with just being a tutor, your students are learning different things, so they may have different goals, but just make sure that they always know what they're working towards. Because the last thing we want is that when your students in session, they don't know what the end goal is. They just feel like, why am I doing this worksheet, or why am I doing this lesson? So make sure they always have like a end goal in mind. And then when they reach the end goal, then you could celebrate with them, so they feel that sense of accomplishment. All right. That was setting a realistic goal. So let's have our final scenario. You have been meeting with Eli for 2 weeks and had 2 tutoring sessions with him. Your reading goal was to read 1 book every day, but mom has been texting you that he always complains about reading every day. Sometimes she can get him to read, but yesterday he completely refused. During your session today, you ask him why he hasn't been reading. He says that reading 1 book a day is too hard for him, and he doesn't want to read anymore. So what do you do? All right, let me copy and paste this into the chat. I'll stop sharing. So this is something I saw a lot. Like we had a reading goal, we had a math goal, but then we would have some kids that are like, you know what, I don't want to do this goal anymore. So if this was your student, how would you address this situation? Yeah, someone said revisit the goal, because to finish 1 book a day, that goal is very high, right? So we have to still have a goal that's attainable. So they said maybe 1 chapter a day. That's a great strategy. That's more manageable. Yeah. A lot of people are saying reset the goal, find reading material they're interested in. Someone else said ask what seems doable and get that input from the student, so the student can tell you what they think about the goal. Pick a favorite book to read for 1 week. That's great. Like maybe if you decide to keep the goal 1 book a day, if they manage to read 5 books at the end of the week, then you can have your reward saying like, wow, you read 5 books. Now we get to read a favorite book together, and this is our reward. Find things that are within his interests. Yeah, definitely, like TV shows or toys, comics. Yeah, reading together. I love that, like having parent involvement, because maybe the student doesn't want to read by himself, so maybe mom or dad can read with the student. That way they still stay motivated to read the one book. Yeah, and just keep their interests in mind too. And then something else to keep in mind too is your students' academic level, because maybe they're feeling frustrated about reading a book because the book is too hard academically. So maybe they need like a lower level book, but you could still keep the goal one book a day. So keeping in mind like what is your students' current grade level. Oh, that's a great one too. Like if reading is hard for them, then watching the read aloud book so that they see a word that's complicated, they at least heard it, and then they could try reading it on their own. Good suggestions, everybody. And yeah, and the thing too about goal setting is that you're most likely gonna have to try a lot of different strategies, because maybe you try the read aloud but it doesn't work. So then you have to try something else too. And just like I would tell this with some of my kids who got really frustrated because it got to a point where they're like, oh, I just can't read. It's too hard. I can't do it by myself. But then I told them, it's like, we're being problem solvers. And you know what? We're just going to try a bunch of different things, and we'll eventually find the strategy that works for you. Because I really think you could achieve this goal of reading one book a day. Even if you think it's hard right now, I think you could do it. But we just had to find the strategy that works for you. And that's pretty much it. So I'll go back to sharing my screen. So just to revisit our agenda, we talked about things to keep in mind, building relationships, building consistency, and goal setting. But I know that all of you have your own individual situations. So now is time for questions. If you have any questions about your current situation, feel free to share, and I'll try my best to answer it.
Hey, hi Anna. So I just uploaded the one from June 11th today. You can find the webinar in two places on the website. One is on the actual SEL program page itself, which you can find from, that sort of tutor resources homepage. And the other place that it is uploaded is in the Tutor University page. We have that whole webinar library, and it is in the behavior management webinars section.
Does anyone want to share about a specific struggle they're experiencing? Oh, yeah. Do you have any tips for ESL students? I'm tutoring a kindergartner. For what subjects? ELA or math? Reading or math? Or both? So for reading, especially with ESL students, I know one of the biggest holdbacks is vocabulary. So if you're reading a book, make sure that you've gone over the vocabulary with them. Maybe you could do like flashcards or something. Because I know I've gone over certain books, like I remember the story was called The Remembrance Quilt, and my kids did not know what a quilt was. So then they didn't want to read the book because they're like, what is a quilt? So yeah, just keeping that in mind, because certain words we take for granted, your ESL student might not know. And then also, if they have trouble pronouncing a word, just being there with them to break down the word part by part so that you could help them read the book smoothly.
I'd also like to take a moment to plug our ABC literacy program. It's for kindergarten through fourth grade, and it's designed specifically to help them from kind of the ground up learn to read. So they can start as early as kindergarten, but we didn't develop the program ourselves. It's been developed by a much more robust organization with a lot of resources. If you are tutoring an ESL student or a student who needs help with reading in grades K through 4, or even in some special cases a little above that, you can reach out to your coordinator, or you can find more information on our website as well.
Great, awesome. Someone's saying, what do you do to make sure, what do you do the very first session? So I could share my slide about building relationships again. Katie, you could correct me if this is wrong, but do they take their pre-assessment the very first session, or do they do that before the first session?
They will take it the first session, depending on what program they are using.
Okay, great. So I would say before, like during that first session, before you go straight to the assessment, just doing the check-in first, like seeing how they're doing and making sure they're even ready to learn. Because who knows what might have happened to them before. Maybe they didn't eat, maybe they got in a fight with their brother or their mom. So just checking in on them, making sure they're okay to do the assessment. And then also right before they do the assessment, just asking them like something really quick about their interests and then sharing your interests too. Someone recommended doing a questionnaire, like you and your student could do a quick questionnaire together where you say your different favorite things and you could compare it. And then after that, you could do the assessment, because then at least the student knows you a little bit better. Let me see. I have 7th student who's in 7th grade who's also in ESL but lazy do homework. How can I motivate her to do the work? So it just goes back to like, what is the end goal? Do they know what their end goal is for all the homework that they're doing? Like, will they reach a certain reading level? Will they reach a certain math level? And then having them be bought into that goal. Because if they don't know what their end goal is, then doing the day-to-day work is not going to be interesting to them or motivating to them. Any tips for high school students? Could it be more specific than that? Because that kind of goal, when it's like kind of vague, it's going to be hard for the student to understand. I don't know if would they be able to, would the tutor set the end goal, Katie, or is this homework from the school? Sorry, going back to your question, Daniel, is this homework from the school or is this just homework you're giving? There's an end goal summer program that they will fail. Sorry, wait. Oh, school homework. Yeah, that's true. So like if Karina brought up a good point, like if they're not following through their work, then they could fail school, which means, I don't know, potentially being held back. Or something else I tell my students too, like I tell them, for you to be successful in the real world, like you need to have these skills. Like you need to be able to read, you need to be able to do math, or else you could get easily taken advantage of. Like, what if you have to sign a contract to buy a house and you can't read it? Or what if you have to sign a contract to get a car? Like, this is why we had to read. And yeah, sometimes it might be boring, but we had to be able to read all kinds of things and just give it a chance. Yeah. Who make excuses to not show up or not to do work. If you have a student that doesn't want to do work or doesn't want to show up, I don't know if you have a chance to just talk to them about like, hey, what's making you feel like this? Because I know students have different situations for not wanting to do work. Usually it's because the work, I know with me, what I've experienced is that the work is just too hard. So then I don't know if you could scaffold the work to make it more accessible for them. And then parents who aren't always responsive, that one's tough. Like if the parents aren't responsive, I don't know if there's someone else they could contact to get a hold of the parents.
Your coordinator is always there for you, especially if you've had multiple cancellations with that, because of the parent or the student, definitely reach out to your coordinator. They are very good detectives. They typically have phone numbers of staff, or they know how to get a hold of the parents to figure that out. Granted, this is a very new time. And so I know many of you are dealing with more cancellations than normal because I think our parents and students are extremely overwhelmed. But please don't forget that your coordinator is always a resource for you. Their whole job is to support you. So make them work for it.
Yeah, definitely. Someone's asking, oh, this is a good one. There's a lot of distractions in the student's environment. Something I've told my students is headphones, like it doesn't even have to be anything fancy, just like something they could use to cover their ears. So they're still going to hear the sound, but at least it's a little bit more muted. And the headphones is like a signal that it's time for me to concentrate. But I don't know if School on Wheels like offers headphones or anything like that. Because I'm trying to think.
So far, we're doing our best to get various pieces of equipment and devices out to students, and we've been very much focused on internet and laptops and tablets so far, but there has been talk about headphones.
Right. Anna mentioned that there's a little girl who's very vocal. I don't know if the little girl could have like a toy or something to just distract her while the session is going on. I'm just thinking about, like, I have a 9-month baby, and when I had to work with my students, I just gave him like a bunch of like toys and just let him be so I could teach my students really quickly. Let me see. Have tutoring canceled twice and offer different time schedules. Probably going back to a coordinator, right, Katie? Yeah. And then someone brought a good point. Yeah, like if our students don't do work, like actually, let me talk about it differently. Like when I have a student that's misbehaving, it's rarely because they're actually like a bad person, they want to hurt you. It's usually because they've experienced something that's caused them to be frustrated, and now they're just lashing out. So it's the same way when students don't do their work. They're not doing their work because they think I'm a bad student and I'm just going to fail. It's because something is usually causing them, something is like intervening with their work. So you want to try to find out what's intervening. What are some good reward ideas that can be carried out online for older students? I teach elementary, so unfortunately this is like out of my expertise, but I can ask some of my friends who work with high school students and get back to you, possibly. So I could give you my email address. Let me text it right now. If you have any more questions, feel free to email me. And if you need other resources, then I could try to connect you with it. Oh, sorry, Katie. I think I sent it to you. Yeah.
We're all learning here.
Yeah. Yeah, headphones definitely make a big difference. Yeah. Yeah, because if your students are not doing work, a lot of times it's because something is distracting them. Let me see. Oh, okay. So they use Khan Academy and they're not able to access a touch keyboard and Khan Academy at the same time. I'm not familiar with the Chrome tablets. I don't know, Katie, if someone in School on Wheels could help them with that question. Khan Academy, I don't know why they're using a touch tablet for Khan Academy, because they could just click the answers, right?
I mean, some students don't have laptops, so they're using tablets instead. And I'm assuming there are certain parts of Khan Academy that you have to type in.
Okay.
When it comes to specific technological issues, that is a little bit outside of the scope of this webinar right now. However, I know that they are very real and that a lot of you are having them. We will be starting up our advanced training program again very soon, and we are building out a whole section where you can all talk to us about your technological issues and concerns, and we can sort of all work through them together. In the meantime, please, again, make sure to reach out to your coordinator. They're coming up with all kinds of creative ideas to get around some of these issues.
Yeah, definitely tech. Like trying to teach my second graders how to get on Google Hangouts, how that took maybe a whole month. just just be patient. You guys will get there.
Yeah.
And then do you have any reading programs that are free? Two recommendations I have are Epic and Libby. I'm not sure if you've heard of them before, but you can have access to ebooks of all grade levels from like kindergarten all the way to high school. I know that during the coronavirus situation, Epic and Libby were free. I'm not sure if that's still the situation now, but you can check out those websites. And it's Epic with an exclamation point. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Excellent. So I think that we'll do it for the questions. We're going on 45 minutes here. So for those of you who are here, as you can see, Natalie's email is in the chat box there. And you're going to receive a follow-up thank you for attending email from my email, and you can always respond to that. If you have any more questions, I will either answer them myself, pass them along to Natalie, or pass them along to your coordinator. But we just want to make sure that everything is being taken care of as well as possible right now, considering how chaotic it has been for everyone. Thank you so much, Natalie, for joining us and for putting together this awesome presentation. I really enjoyed the interactive format, and I think our tutors did as well.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to everybody, and there are a lot of experts in this webinar as well, so thank you for your input and your strategies.